Today's conversation is led by Eric Silverberg, Court Administrator, Municipal Court, Tucson, Arizona.
Well, today, for our question of ethics, we're going to have a topic that probably you've heard about, and I think it would be great if we all could just sort of share our thoughts about what quiet quitting may be, and if we think it's a thing, what we ought to do about it. So I think that's basically where we're going to talk about today. This is the era where people are talking about quiet quitting, which some would say is an emerging change in the contract between court and the employees. Or is it just a word for some stuff people just not doing their job? So I guess some of the questions are, what are the ethical challenges a court faces to ensure professionalism and diligence? How can we ensure we have a common understanding, and how the court should respond? But first, let me throw out to you guys, is this a new term for the same old problem or something different?
I was not familiar with this term, but when I first saw it, my initial thought was, is it, an issue of someone that is becoming unmotivated? Are they just becoming disenchanted with their job at some point, and production is suffering? So it was a new term to me. So
this is Norman. It's a new, catchy, alliterative topic, label, but for a long time, there was a phrase or a title called "retiring in place," and that was used in the past to describe someone who has scaled back their effort, usually as the term gives you the hint, retiring in place, maybe close to retirement. They're a few years out and they're saying, well, I'm just going to coast to the end line. But it describes the same sort of behavior as I think is being described with quiet. So I think the behavior isn't necessarily new, but I think the demographics and the stage of the career perhaps has changed. Or maybe not changed, because you still have retiring in place type people, probably. But the statistics I've seen is that there is for people who are not putting out the full effort, that there's been a significant rise in a younger cohort the behavior has happened. And so then that's the rise of the quiet quitting and why it's gotten so attention now. But I don't think it's a new behavior. It's just it's changed the demographics and such.
I agree with Norman that the rationale may have changed recently. I looked up this term and I got something that was sort of interesting in terms of the reasoning behind it. The history that I got was that this was created several years ago by an engineer named Zaid Khan, who put up a TikTok video. For his definition of quiet quitting is, you're still performing your duties, but you're no longer subscribing to the hustle culture mentality that work is your life. The reality is it is not, and your worth as a person is not defined by your labor. Setting boundaries and simply completing the tasks you're supposed to complete within the time that you are paid to do them. No extra frills, no more working nights and weekends, incessantly checking your email. So I thought that was an interesting counterpoint to, I think, maybe what Forbes thinks is the term of quiet quitting.
I don't know that that's quite where we are. I mean, the concept that you just described sounds more like a healthy work balance to me. Where you're not doing work 24/7. But I think what Norman said resonates in terms of the demographic. The younger demographic may be less engaged in the workplace, and that may also reflect the fact that people don't commit to working at one or two places for their career. They're every 5 years or so they're looking to move somewhere else, and you get 2 or 3 years into a job and okay, I'm ready to start looking for something different. Maybe that's when the quiet quitting concept.
The way that I saw it was that they're just working with colleagues around my same age. There has been a stigma on balancing your work-life balance, and setting those boundaries with your job and saying this is what I'm going to do, but this is what I'm here to do. I feel like that has been more of an increase that I've seen in my professional, being. But I do think that there has always been there has been that certain demographic that doesn't necessarily feel that they have to go above and beyond in order to succeed, but they just kind of go by. And when I saw the quiet quitting, in my mentality and my age, this is going to show my age. When I heard quiet quitting, I thought of the term ghosting. So you're slowly detaching yourself from what you were committed to, and you're slowly putting less efforts in and finding less importance in it. And that, when I heard that term, that was like the first thing that came to mind was detachment.
Like Sam said, maybe I'm showing my age here, but I kind of sit back and think, wow, that's a pretty audacious thing to go in and dictate. This is what I'm willing to give you. This is what I'm not going to give you. I'm going to do exactly what is dictated to me. Other duties as assigned is a fallacy. Maybe I'm the only one that feels that way, but it just, I don't know. I find that interesting, but I do think that the way that you said that there is a demographic that feels that way, I would agree with that. But I think that's also part of the challenge within the workplace, is dealing with all of those different demographics and generational outlooks.
I definitely feel that leadership's challenge is working with different generations and demographics and the different behaviors that come with those, because you have the work driven, like I'm gonna just be business-like, I'm gonna just go for the top type people, and then you have the people who are like, I just want to work and I want to, what is it, live to work or work to live. I like, it's one or the other. And I feel like that I see more of the work to live and live out your life as as best as you want to, but don't overwhelm yourself and don't overwork yourself. I think that stigma has been more, it's coming up more with the younger generations, and that, like, it just goes to show the commitment too. And I think that that's also an issue with people job hopping, because they start working with one company or one entity, and then they realize that this company doesn't affect my work-life balance, so I'm going to go off to this other company that does advertise work-life balance, but then they find something else that is wrong. And so, like I said, the attachment part of it, they find one red flag and then they start detaching themselves, and then that's where I feel like the quiet quitting comes in, is that the less motivation kicks in, calling in more, finding excuses not to do work, finding excuses not to join projects. That's just what I've seen. That is what I've gathered.
I didn't even know those things were options to say in the workplace.
But see, and I think, Courtney, that's why it's called quiet quitting. And I don't think it's an option. I don't think people are voicing it. I think they're just shutting down. And for me, the concept, the first time I heard this term, I thought exactly what Norman thought, the retired in place people, the people that are on their way out, they've disengaged and they've shut down, and they're just biding their time until retirement. And so now, because it has shifted because of pandemic and the new generational workforce kind of wanting that, I'm here to learn a little bit and then I'm checking out. How do we as organizations kind of keep that engagement piece? And I've heard Samantha say it several times, disengage or detaching. And it's almost, I see it as not being vocal, like Courtney. They're not coming in and saying, if you do this, it's almost like if something doesn't go their way. Case in point, I had a few employees that didn't get promoted first time out of the chute. First time, I don't know how many times I've interviewed to get promoted in my career, and I never got it the first time around, right? But they're like, okay, no, you didn't hire me. So they start checking out and looking for other jobs and going somewhere else. So again, it's maybe part mindset, generational mindset, but it also, I think, how as organizations can we keep folks engaged?
And Tina, you put your finger on something exactly that I've been thinking too. I mean, I think Norman is entirely correct. The behavior isn't new, but the generational cohort or the demographic is new. But here's the difference. When you retire in place, if we want to use that term, that your career advancement and your career ambitions are sort of coasting out. What is kind of distressing to me is for a younger cohort, you pay a price for quiet quitting. You pay a price for that disengagement that the retired in place cohort doesn't pay. In other words, if we put you on a committee and you never participate or never show up, or we give you a project and that there's just minimal completion, or you apply for a promotion, just as you say, you don't get it the first time around, so you go elsewhere. I mean, that disengagement, I would think, has to hurt your career progression. And so when a younger employee, for example, is frustrated at relatively lower pay because you're lower in the org chart in the beginning, or work content that's less exciting, well, you're never going to transcend that unless you, as antique as this concept might be, until you put in the time, until you make the investment, you're not going to transcend that. And so it seems to me the distressing difference here is, yeah, the behavior might not be new, but that younger cohort pays a price for that disengagement that retired in place cohort just doesn't pay.
And Carl, they're genuinely offended.
Right.
When the expectation is there to put in your time. I think that those of us of a different generation find that behavior offensive. So I think it's very interesting, and I do think as leaders, it is part of our responsibility to be able to identify those signs of we're looking at production numbers, looking at demeanor, looking at when we say that we need somebody to cover a specific docket, who's volunteering, who is continually never volunteering, and having those conversations. I recently had almost this conversation verbatim with somebody else, and asked a very specific question of, well, what would it take for us to reinvigorate you about coming to work? How can we better motivate you? And the answer was, I don't know. So, you can identify the behavior, but I think the challenge is in identifying a solution. When asking for one, you're not given one.
This discussion is such perfect timing for me, because we have in South Dakota, state court admin and the circuits have been working on what we call our compression problem. We had a terrible time with employee attraction and recruitment. And so we raised the lower level classifications and pay bands to attract entry-level employees. Well, that compressed our salary table to the point where the differentials between entry-level and supervisory are relatively small. Now we're taking steps to fix that, but at the moment they're still relatively small. And so when we post a promotional opportunity, the difference might only be $1.50 an hour. And a lot of candidates won't bother to apply because they think to themselves, well, why should I do that for $1? Why should I take on all that headache, all that responsibility for $1? The differential is not worth it. Well, it may not be a lot at the moment, but it opens up new opportunities. It broadens your resume and your experience base. I mean, long-term, for career purposes, it may not pay a lot, but it pays off in the long run for your career progression. But it just seems to me that those sort of longer term, broader career ambitions just don't enter a lot of the new employees' minds. And that's kind of distressing to me, because like I said, as antique as it is that, you got to pay your dues before you climb that ladder, that may be a sort of a retro way of thinking, but that kind of still applies. And so if they're not willing or not interested or have priorities elsewhere to the point where they don't pay those dues, I still think it applies. And I don't know how you climb that ladder. I don't know how you enrich your career and become more engaged if you don't have the ambition to do so.
I feel like I'm the voice in the wilderness on this, but my recollection is, particularly when I first got into this business, there was a very definite mindset of you live to work. Your job was your definition. And folks in the profession would engage in some valiant work, which looking back at it, I would say was pretty suspect. I can remember folks who would say that, yes, the court administrator came to me on a Thursday afternoon and wanted a 10-page document report ready on Monday morning on the profession of court administration. I stayed all day on Saturday and all day on Sunday in the office alone to hand over that report. You look back at that and I'm thinking, that's abuse. Plus the fact is what we're saying is that you have to put in your time for the potential that maybe at some time in the future, you're going to get a payoff. That payoff is not guaranteed. So is it surprising that people say, I've been passed over twice, I'm out of here?
I think Peter poses
I-
an interesting perspective, because if you look, say in Europe, they don't keep the same work hours we do. They may roll in at 9 o'clock in the morning and work until 3 in the afternoon.
They work to live.
And yeah, and I'm thinking, not going in at 9 o'clock, I'm 1.5 energy drinks into the day by 9 a.m. So I think it's an interesting perspective that to some degree may be unique to the United States. And I'm certainly not saying that in other countries they don't work hard and diligently, but there seems to be a different work culture in other places around the world that the United States just hasn't found our way to, or are reluctant to do so, or maybe we just like the grind. I don't know, but I thought that was an interesting perspective, Peter.
Well, let me pose one aspect of this, which I think many of us can relate to, that's certainly widespread, and that is, and going back to the job interview and what we tell candidates and what we don't tell candidates. I can't tell you the number of times that I can remember that there was a budget shortfall, the tax revenues were coming down, and so the court, along with all the other county agencies, were required to make a 5% or a 7% budget cut. And the very first thing that we always did was we put on a hiring freeze, which we never really think of. But in fact, what that means is you as a worker are automatically expected to pick up the slack for the other employee who has left the company. And you're not going to get any extra money for it. And you probably won't even get any recognition for it. And this could go on for months, maybe permanently. And we never talk about this in the job interview. We never say, oh, by the way, this is also one of the downsides of working here because we're a government agency and this is how we make up for it. Are we being fully forthcoming in not talking about that aspect of the job? And I think probably most of us have at one time or another in our career experienced hiring freezes or even riffs.
I've got a couple of thoughts here. First of all, a phrase that comes to mind during a bunch of this discussion is, okay, boomer. The younger cohort in generations looks at people who look like and act like many of us on this call, frankly, who are been around for a long time. And the kind of attitudes that the expectation is that you will work, long hours and you will do what you're told and all that kind of stuff, frankly, have become antiquated. And the new reality is that the labor market that's out there, for whatever reason, because of the pandemic, because of changing demographics, the economy, all sorts of things, there's different expectations in terms of the labor market, in terms of supply and demand, and what workers are willing to do and do, to be kind of pejorative, to put up with in terms of their treatment. And Samantha, I think, made some good points about, work-life, life-work balance, and that employers today need to be conscious of that. And so this is an ethics discussion. I mean, let's get back. I'd like to get back to, okay, what does the code of conduct say? it says, you should be diligent, you should be honest. And so what is a reasonable expectation in regards to those things? Okay. And which then jumps me back to the discussion we had back in January, February about how do you hire and attract people who are diligent, who are honest. And we need to be careful not to label all of the younger cohort, the millennials or whatever, as being a certain way. That is, I think, a really wrong way of thinking. And we need to say, yes, there are people in that demographic which are less committed to work or whatever, but there are many who are. And so in our selection process, I think that, as part of this discussion, I'd like us to focus on, well, how can we then try to attract people to the courts and our profession and the work we do who are diligent and who are honest and will have that kind of commitment to doing good work and but also adjust to not expect the super above and beyond that Peter was just talking about.
So I guess the question I'd like to ask now, when we start talking about, the duty of diligence, whether Arizona or national, and there's a lot of different ones there, are we dealing with an issue of competence, diligence of the employees, or are we dealing with the issue of competent diligence and awareness of the leadership? I mean, what is it we're really dealing with here?
I've certainly been thinking about the leadership angle during a lot of these comments, both during the recruitment process, subsequent onboarding, and periodic reviews. You should be clearly setting expectations and honestly living up to what you say are the conditions for you getting positive reviews and or not, and what the conditions would be for promotion or just a general raise. And if we're not doing that, then we're not meeting the managerial requirements for you.
Yeah, exactly. Leaders need to lead and do a good job of leading.
I would like to jump in and just say that I was going to say the exact same thing, is that that leadership needs to step in and from the get-go, from the recruitment process, these are the expectations. This is what's expected of you. You're expected to be here at 8 a.m. We have a training team that four of the new hires that we just hired, we are having issues with them coming in late, and it's like we're putting back our classroom time, and we had to get HR involved and stand in front of the class and be like, this is why this isn't acceptable. We need the time to be able to train you and to be able to develop you and teach you, how to engage with people. And if you're not here, it's not going to happen. But I also wanted to touch base with the growth aspect too. I feel like it's really important for leadership to communicate where the growth opportunities are going to be in your career, and set those expectations of the timeline too. If you find out from that person what their goal is, find out where they are education wise, career wise, and help them create a plan on how to get to that point so that they feel like they're also interested in it. Because I can say from my personal experience that the reassurance of having somebody having staff or leadership who I know is invested in me or invested in my career or my education and wants to help me grow, that is something that I find, appealing in a leadership team. And that's something that I will commit to, and I'm loyal to those people because I know that they're, it goes both ways. And I feel like leadership really needs to be able to open up those conversations with their staff. And that kind of, I feel like that also will build a better core of that open door policy of being able to go to them and say, hey, what's your goal? This is what your expectation is. And if they're not meeting those expectations, you also need to document and have those conversations. You need to be able to say, hey, your attendance is an issue. This is where it's leading to. Remember, we want you to be on track of this. It's not going that way because of where your behaviors are. And I feel like putting that accountability on them also helps too.
Any other thoughts about what maybe we should be doing to maybe mitigate quiet quitting?
I think that sometimes in today's litigious society, that some leadership fear those conversations because it can go south quickly. And I'm not advocating to say that they shouldn't take place. I think it's really important to understand as a leader what motivates the people that you're working with. And I think, I have seen fair results during the interview process, asking what motivates you. And I think as the person interviewing or talking to that person, asking them what they know about the court system, what they perceive that the clerk's role is and the clerk job is to be, and where they, not that where do you see yourself in 5 years question, but is this something you see as could be a future, an actual career for you, and you have a future here. But I think it is the responsibility of leadership to recognize those differences and recognize when there's a challenge. And when someone is off track, I think if we're not doing that, then we are remiss in our duties as much as that individual is for maybe slacking back on performance and not saying anything.
I think the one thought that I had, and again, I just reviewed an article about this, which I thought had some merit, is that when folks are really slacking off, as Samantha said, they get often negative feedback. What are you doing? We need you to be here. We need you to shut up. The opposite end of that is maybe more dangerous because you don't get that kind of feedback. If you're a leader, often you end up in increasingly rarefied air, and you can easily lose touch with your workforce, with your employees, and begin to draw assumptions which are easily turn into stereotypes. And I think that's a difficult problem, and it's a trait for true leaders to have to work against, to not lose touch with their workforce. If folks are having trouble because of childcare, or they're sick, it becomes increasingly easy to just write folks off as being slackers.
Well, I think you're basically speaking to the managerial side of the diligence, that you have to be an engaged manager, and that puts certain duties on you to be, objectively, periodically, regularly, whatever, reporting, or just, reporting the conduct that you see to the employee and giving them feedback, positive or negative, so that they know where they stand and know what your expectations are. And if you're not doing that, then you're just as disengaged as you're saying the employee may be.
Yeah, I mean, it's just routine, effective communication, as Kent was just talking about, is really important. It's just effective supervision, and if that's not going on, then you're in a world of hurt. And so, good supervised behaviors, good, targeted training, and giving the opportunity to the staff to learn and grow for development. I mean, all these things are just good management and good leadership that needs to happen just in general for any situation, to have a good workforce. And I think it's a good response to the kind of quiet quitting under the definition that we've settled on, as opposed to the one that Peter, you sent in that article, the one about people not giving their full effort and such. So I think that is a key piece of it, as well as what I talked about earlier, is doing what you can to attract and hire people who are more inclined to be committed to the mission courts, who value public service, who see the courts as a good place to work, and thus they come in with that kind of an attitude. And so your selection process, I think, is a big piece of this as well.
I keep thinking to myself, though, and I don't mean to cop out of sort of higher level responsibilities as a court leader or manager, but I think to myself, if I've got two employees, one of them I'm going to appoint to a committee, and she's sometimes not going to show up, and when she does, she's not going to participate, or I've got another employee who will be prompt and engaged and energetic. Who am I going to pick for that committee? I think I would love to have the time to energize disengaged employees. I would love that. I think that's a good human thing to do to broaden people's perspectives, to support their career. And I think of the mentors that I've had and those who have supported my careers, I would love to do that. But as a practical matter, if I've got those choices, I sit here and think to myself, and I don't mean to imply that Samantha represents millions of her demographic cohort, but I keep thinking to myself, I'll bet you Samantha hasn't risen as fast as she has because she's a slouch. I think there's a practical consideration here where those, despite the fact that Norma might think they're retro, energetic, engaged employees are simply going to climb faster. I'm going to pick them for broader projects, for higher level positions, because I don't have time to energize disengaged employees. I wish I did, but I don't. And I think a lot of us don't.
Yeah, I think that's a good observation, Carl. One thing I think we need to keep in mind that leadership and supervision does include accountability, both for the supervisor, but also for the employee. If the employee is slacking off and not doing the job, there needs to be accountability. Of course, you have to have set the table in the first place to set reasonable expectations and have goals and measure performance appropriately. But then there's accountability. And if you have an employee who is not doing the job, well, there is an exit door process that can be and should be invoked if they're not pulling their weight. I hope my previous comments didn't lead anyone to believe that I don't believe that there's accountability. There needs to be accountability. You're going to have horrific morale in your workforce if there isn't accountability and everybody's going to start slacking off and saying, well, there's no reason to work hard here.
By almost definition of what Carl put out, you choose one person, you have unchosen, or whatever you want to call it, disincentivized another employee. And that employee knows that. And they know they've been passed over. So, it becomes a circular situation when the employee says, well, this place doesn't care about me. Maybe they don't think I've been putting out as much. Maybe I think I've been putting out more than they think I have. But clearly, with 100 little actions like that, you as the leader are sending out a message that I like this person over here and I'm not satisfied with you. And what do we expect is going to happen? They're going to quiet quit. They're saying, I'm going to start putting in only the minimal effort because the leadership has shown that they are not shining their light on me. And maybe I start looking for someplace else, or maybe I just retire in place.
Well, whatever happened to the perceived archaic practices of introspection and self-evaluation? If I didn't get picked over, maybe I should ask myself why, and go have a conversation with the chooser and say, hey, like what could I have done differently, or what could I have improved upon, or is there something missing in my skill set? And I think there is a responsibility to that individual as well. When I look at my leadership team, I can tell you that every one of them are going to grind until they get the work done.
I don't really have any last final thoughts except to thank all of you. I think a lot of very valuable perspectives were aired there about this whole topic, and it does seem to be something that continues to move.
Samantha, thank you very much for joining us. I think your perspectives were excellent, and we really, really appreciate it. Feel free to join us anytime.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I appreciate it. Thank you, Eric, for inviting me, because I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you.
Until next time, I'm going to stop recording.
Thanks for joining us today. The Question of Ethics Conversation is a regular segment on ethics, courts, and court administration. Today's episode will be available on our website, in the Court Manager Journal, on the Court Leader website, on YouTube, Facebook, iTunes, LinkedIn, and on Twitter. Become part of the conversation. Join us live when we hold the Question of Ethics Conversation. Episodes are held immediately following the monthly NACM Ethics Subcommittee meeting on the third Thursday of the month. Check the NACM Committee webpage for the schedule and Zoom link. If you have questions, comments, or ideas for future conversations, email us. Our address is ethics@nacomnet.org. Did you hear an interesting comment by one of the panelists that you would like to listen to again, but you don't want to search the entire episode to find it? The Additional Resources section on the webpage has a question time marker sheet. Find the discussion question on the sheet, and next to it is the time that question was asked. You can quickly fast forward to that time and listen to the panel's comments. Remember, if you don't have time to watch an episode, you can always listen to the audio version. Listen in your car or on the bus, on your way to or from work. You never have to miss an episode. I'm Pete Kiefer, and on behalf of our guests, the Court Leaders website, and the National Association for Court Management, thank you, and have a great day. The views, information, and opinions expressed during this episode are solely those of the host and the individual presenters. They do not necessarily represent the position of the National Association for Court Management.